Some messages do not arrive to make you feel better. They arrive to end your excuses. And if you have been feeling pressure building around the same issue from 3 different directions, then you already know what I mean. A relationship feels heavier. A decision you thought was simple starts resisting you. A delay exposes how much of your peace was tied to an outcome you do not control. Most people will call that stress and move on. But there are moments when stress is just the polite word people use when their life has started revealing the truth faster than they are willing to admit it. This is one of those moments. And if you are hearing this at the exact point where your old explanations are no longer holding, then what is happening around you is asking for honesty, not comfort. Most people misunderstand moments like this because they think awareness is the beginning. It usually isn't. By the time something becomes clear enough to name, it has already touched your routine several times. It has already shown up in your timing, your reactions, your tolerance, your sleep, your patience, and the way your body tightens around certain names or decisions. Clarity often enters quietly and stays unannounced until the evidence is too coordinated to ignore. That is why the first feeling is rarely relief. The first feeling is usually discomfort. You start noticing that the same issue is appearing through different doors. A delay at work carries the exact emotional weight of a private conversation you have been avoiding. A harmless comment from someone close to you lands with the force of a confession. A plan you thought you wanted starts feeling strangely expensive, even before money, because deep down you already know what it will cost you to keep pretending it fits. People call this overthinking when they are not ready to face it. They call it a weird mood, a strange week, a rough patch, low energy, too much sensitivity. Sometimes those explanations are fair, but sometimes they are just softer names for the moment when your life has started telling the truth faster than your mouth can. And that truth does not always arrive in a grand way. It can show up while you are doing something ordinary. Standing at the sink, replaying a sentence someone said 2 days ago. Opening your inbox and realizing the message you were waiting for matters less than the fact that you built so much hope around it. Walking into a room and feeling instantly and without any theater that you no longer have the strength to keep being the version of yourself that room expects. These things look small from the outside. They are not small. They are exact. A real turning point often works like this. It doesn't knock once and leave. It circles back. It tests whether you can recognize a message even when it arrives dressed as inconvenience. First, it repeats. Then it delays. Then it exposes. Not to punish you, to remove your ability to keep misreading what is already there. Start with what repeated. Maybe it was not one dramatic sign. Maybe it was the same theme crossing different parts of your life. Someone brings up independence, and later, that same day, you feel trapped by a commitment you made too quickly. You hear yourself promising patience, then notice your own resentment rising, because patience was never really the issue. You keep returning to the same question, not because you enjoy spiraling, but because your mind knows the answer has been standing nearby, and you have not fully admitted it yet. Then there is what delayed. Delay reveals things speed protects. When everything moves fast, you can ride momentum and call it certainty. When something slows down, the surface starts cracking. You see the missing piece. You hear the weak promise. You notice how much of your confidence depended on not having to wait. A delayed reply can show you where you have been hanging your peace on someone else's timing. A postponed decision can reveal that what you were calling readiness was really desperation to escape uncertainty. And then comes exposure, which is the part most people hate. Exposure is when something familiar stops feeling trustworthy in the same old way. Not because it exploded, because it became legible. You hear a person speak, and suddenly, the gap between their words and their effort becomes impossible to ignore. You revisit a plan and realize the version in your head was much stronger than the version in reality. You listen to yourself explain why you are staying in something, and halfway through your own explanation, you can feel the hollowness in it. That moment matters. It is not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It is quiet, and because it is quiet, many people betray themselves there. They rush to smooth it over. They tell themselves they are tired. They say they need more time. They try to restore the old emotional fog because fog is kinder to habits than clarity is. But there are moments when fog is no longer available. If this message reaches someone at the right point, it does not feel like being flattered. It feels like being caught by accuracy. It feels like somebody laid your last few days out on a table and placed the matching pieces next to each other without asking permission. The repeated issue, the delayed answer, the exposed weakness, the truth you almost admitted yesterday. The same pressure speaking 3 different dialects. That is the part only a small number of people usually understand. Not because they are superior, not because they have access to some hidden language nobody else can learn. They understand because they are willing to let a message interrupt them instead of decorate them. They can handle insight that does not immediately make them feel special. They can sit with the embarrassment of realizing life has been trying to tell them the truth through ordinary events for longer than they wanted to admit. Most people want meaning that keeps their self-image intact. They want reassurance without revision. They want proof that they matter, but not proof that they must change the way they are reading their own life. So, when a real message appears, they either romanticize it or dismiss it. They turn it into entertainment, or they force it back into coincidence. Both reactions protect the same thing, the old arrangement. This one does not protect the old arrangement. Think of the last several days as a record, not a memory. A memory is emotional and selective. A record is less forgiving. A record does not care what story you prefer. It only shows what kept happening. Picture one scene. You are halfway through your day. Nothing outwardly dramatic is wrong. Yet one small interruption changes the temperature inside you more than it should. Not because the interruption is huge, but because it touches a weak point that has been there for a while. Later that evening, something unrelated happens, and the same internal reaction returns. Not identical in content, but identical in shape. Your body knows before your mind says it out loud. This is the same issue. Picture another scene. You are waiting for something to move forward. A reply, a meeting, a payment, a decision, a confirmation. It doesn't come when expected. At first, the delay seems annoying. Then a stranger thing happens. In the space created by the delay, you start seeing how much emotional weight you placed on that one outcome. You realize you had quietly handed too much power to something outside you. The pause did not create the problem. It revealed where the problem was already living. Picture one more scene. You are with someone or thinking about someone, and the polished explanation you have been using no longer holds. You can still repeat it if you want. You can still defend the situation. You can still make the case. But something in you has stopped believing your own argument. That is exposure. Once that happens, the old language starts collapsing, even if the outer structure hasn't collapsed yet. These are not random fragments. They are the ledger of a shift. What returned, what delayed, what lost its disguise. This is why I would not reduce a moment like this to emotion alone. Emotion is real, but it can be noisy. Patterns are cleaner. When the same underlying issue moves through your relationships, your schedule, your private thoughts, and your energy level, it is no longer useful to ask whether something is happening. It is more useful to ask whether you are ready to stop negotiating with what has already become visible. That question becomes even sharper in a month like this one. At the start of April, the sky offered one of its loudest images first. The pink moon reached peak illumination on April 2nd, 2026 at 2:11 UTC. That is the kind of moment everybody notices. A full moon is easy to point at. It gathers attention without effort. But what interests me more is what comes after the obvious moment. Once brightness has done its work, what remains? What becomes visible when the spectacle is over and people stop performing their reaction to it? That is usually where the more useful reading begins. The very next morning, April 3rd, Mercury reaches greatest elongation. It becomes easier to see than usual, but not in a lazy way. You still have to look low in the eastern sky before sunrise. You still have to catch it near the edge of day before the growing light starts competing with your attention. That image fits this message almost too well. Some truths are not hidden because they are absent. They are hard to catch because they live in narrow windows. If you are distracted, if you are late, if you expect every meaningful thing to announce itself at full volume, you miss them. Then you say there was nothing there. Later in the month, around the new moon on April 17th, another quieter lesson appears: Earthshine. The dark portion of the moon is faintly lit by light reflected from Earth. It is often easiest to notice on the mornings of April 13th and 14th, and again after sunset on April 20th and 21st. That matters because it corrects a common mistake. People assume that if something looks dark, it contains no information. Not true. Sometimes the hidden part is visible only under softer conditions. Not absent, not empty. Simply unreadable unless you stop demanding the harshest light. There are parts of your own situation that work the same way. Then come the Lyrids, active from April 14th through April 30th and peaking around April 22nd to 23rd. Brief streaks, fast evidence. You either notice them or you don't. The sky does not hold them in place to protect your timing. You have to be there, adjusted to the dark, paying attention. Again, the lesson is familiar. Some forms of truth do not stay on display long enough for endless denial. They appear, register, and pass. That doesn't make them less real. It makes readiness matter. And if you keep watching the month closely, the pattern continues. On April 18th and 19th, the thin crescent moon appears near Venus and the Pleiades. On April 22nd, the moon comes close to Jupiter. On April 25th, it moves near Regulus, brightness beside brightness, nearness that lasts for a moment and then shifts. A sky full of relationships defined by timing, angle, and attention. Not everything meaningful is permanent. Some things are brief and still decisive. Some things are near enough to be seen only if you are actually looking up at the right time. That is why this message is less sentimental than people expect. It is not saying, "Relax, everything is secretly wonderful." It is saying, "Look again because the pattern has become easier to read than your excuses." It is saying that visibility has conditions. It is saying that what you call uncertainty may sometimes be the last thin layer of resistance between you and an obvious truth. Once you accept that, a lot of your language changes. You stop calling every delay a punishment. Some delays are exposure. You stop calling every intense feeling intuition. Some intense feelings are withdrawal symptoms from an identity you can no longer carry comfortably. You stop calling every return a sign you should run backward. Sometimes what returns comes back, so you can finally see it clearly enough to release your fantasy about it. That last part is important. Recognition is not an invitation to panic. It is not permission to make a grand scene out of clarity. One of the least mature things people do after finally seeing a truth is confuse reaction with courage. They rush, announce, cut, chase, confess, or collapse because movement feels better than accuracy. But this kind of moment is not asking for noise. It is asking for honesty with steadier hands. You do not have to explode because you understand something. You do not have to turn the whole week upside down because a pattern has become visible. Mature clarity is often quieter than fear. It has fewer speeches in it, fewer dramatic vows, fewer emotional performances. It simply stops pretending. Maybe that means you stop defending a connection that survives only through effort on one side. Maybe it means you stop forcing enthusiasm around a direction your spirit has already stepped away from. Maybe it means you stop waiting for a perfect sentence from somebody else to authorize what you already know. Maybe it means you stop worshiping potential, where the actual reality has been disappointing you for too long. Those changes are not flashy, they are clean. And that cleanliness is part of why only a few people really understand a moment like this while they are still in it. Most people are trained to trust whatever is loudest. They trust the crisis, the argument, the dramatic reveal, the huge breakthrough, the visible collapse. They miss the quieter authority of repetition. They overlook the intelligence of patterns. They ignore how often life tells the truth in small, coordinated incidents before it ever raises its voice. The people who catch this early are usually the ones who have learned, often the hard way, that their life changes long before the public evidence catches up. They know what it feels like when a room goes emotionally dead before anyone else admits it. They know what it feels like when a path loses its future before the paperwork changes. They know what it feels like when an explanation still sounds reasonable out loud, but feels false the second it leaves their mouth. That is not paranoia. That is earned sensitivity. And earned sensitivity is different from drama because it is expensive. It usually comes from previous seasons where you ignored yourself too long, negotiated too much, explained away too many signals, gave too many extensions, accepted too many half-truths, and then paid the price for every delay in recognition. After enough of that, something in you matures. You stop needing a collapse to validate what a pattern has already made plain. If this reaches you with unusual force, it may be because that maturity has already begun. Not perfection, not total certainty. Just enough maturity to recognize that a message does not have to praise you in order to be meant for you. Sometimes what is meant for you arrives as a mirror you didn't ask for. Sometimes it arrives as the removal of confusion. Sometimes it arrives as the end of your ability to sincerely call something random. There is a before and after hidden inside that sentence. Before, you could still tell yourself you needed more data when what you really needed was more courage. Before, you could still use time as cover. Before, you could still romanticize a situation because the facts had not fully cornered your imagination. Before, you could still say, maybe I'm reading too much into this, and retreat into comfortable uncertainty. After, the same words stop working. After, delay becomes a choice. After, silence becomes a stance. After, pretending not to know starts costing more than knowing. After, you can still avoid action if you want to, but you cannot honestly call the avoidance innocent anymore. That is the edge many people are approaching now. Not the edge of chaos, the edge of honesty. So no, this is not for everyone. Not because it is obscure, because it asks too much. It asks a person to admit what has repeated, to respect what has been delayed, to study what has been exposed, to stop demanding a more dramatic sign when the current one is already clear enough. To understand that being ready does not always feel uplifting. Sometimes, being ready feels like the quiet loss of your appetite for self-deception. That loss is not tragic. It is expensive, yes. It can leave you standing still for a minute, hearing the truth more clearly than you expected to. It can make a familiar arrangement suddenly feel thin. It can make your old script for the future sound less convincing than it did last month. But it is not tragic. It is clean. And clean things tend to look severe only to people who are still bargaining with the mess. By now, you probably already know whether this belongs to you. Not because I told you, because while listening, your mind kept supplying examples without being asked. A message, a delay, a room, a face, a sentence, a plan, a fatigue that suddenly had a name. That is how real recognition works. It does not need to invent evidence. It activates what has already been stored inside your week. And once that happens, you cannot go fully backward. You can postpone, you can distract yourself, you can dress it up in softer language and buy a little more time. People do that all the time. But you cannot return to genuine innocence about it. Something has already become readable. That may be the whole dividing line. Some will keep looking straight at the pattern and call it coincidence because coincidence asks nothing of them. A few will admit they have been seeing the same truth from different angles and will stop insulting their own intelligence by pretending otherwise. If you are one of those few, this is not the moment to become dramatic. It is the moment to become exact, not louder, clearer, not rushed, steady, not enchanted by every feeling, guided by what is repeated with too much consistency to ignore. A full moon peaks and passes. Mercury appears where only careful people bother to look. The darker side of the moon glows when the light is right. Meteors cross the sky too quickly for the distracted to keep them. Even the month is speaking in the same language. Visibility, timing, attention, brief windows, clean signals. No need for theater. So, if something in your life has become impossible to misread, treat that as the moment it is. Not a random mood, not a passing thought, not another little disturbance to be buried under routine. A message, yes, but not the kind that arrives to make you feel chosen. The kind that arrives when your excuses have finally become weaker than the pattern itself.